Hi, welcome back to another TerranScapes video. This video is going to talk about the ocean board set that I'm working on and some of the aspects of waves. And if you've been following my channel for a while, if you haven't and you're brand new, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I hope you find this interesting. But if you're a long-time viewer, you'll know that I've done a few ocean boards periodically, and I have tried to make some changes to them over time to make the waves more realistic and the ocean surface more interesting and more realistic. But I realized I have some problems with that too, which we're not going to talk about today. But what I realized when I started to look at these boards and think about the water coming up the shore is that I didn't understand wave physics. And you might think, can't you just look at a picture? And I realized that at least for me, I wasn't able to discern the key characteristics of what was going on and why it was going on. And because this piece, this set is going to have an island in the middle, and I wanted to handle the ocean around the island a little bit differently, partly for managing, making the waves, and partly to give the island a little more realism. And to preserve its space, so I push the shore out, which means I have less of a transition area. So that means I have to handle the waves coming up that shorter transition area differently. All of that said, I decided I needed to do a crash course on waves. So what I'm going to do as the intro part 2 of this video is I'm going to take you on the crash course that I gave myself on wave physics. I'm going to show you the videos, some photos, and explain what I learned and how I will then transfer that knowledge to these boards. So if you're not interested in Ocean Dynamics 101, I'll put a little link right here that will jump you ahead to the actual look at the boards. But I have a feeling that most of you will probably be interested in it. If you're a fan of my channel, you love to see the details that go into my maniacal brain as I try to come up with solutions. And it will also help you, of course, when I start talking about it at the boards. So let's stop there, and I'm going to take you over to the computer, and I'm going to teach you what I learned about waves. So the very first thing that I wanted to learn about waves were the types of waves that can occur and how they are related to the slope of the underlying landforms. Now, I did this in PowerPoint, and this means sometimes my cursor seems to be disappearing, so if you see me go into a glitchy mode there for a second, that's probably why. But we have three basic types of waves. We have these spilling waves, which tend to have beaches with gentle slopes. The surf sort of folds over into a foam and carries across the shore in that kind of a manner all the way through. Then we have what we think of as a more traditional wave, which is the plunging breaker. Now this is a beach slope that's sort of an intermediate to semi-steep angle, and what happens is then because it's got a steeper angle, the wave pulls up and higher. We're going to talk about more of that in a second, and then breaks over. So this is what causes that traditional wave that we normally think of. The third kind of wave is what they call a surging breaker, and a surging breaker is when the water comes up against a very, very steep or almost vertical surface, so the wave doesn't have time to break in a conventional way. They sort of slump up to it and then foam and break, and there's a little variation that can happen there, but this gives you an idea of at least where I was starting in terms of what kind of a wave am I likely to be modeling. Now, once I understood the types of waves, start thinking about how they operate against a shoreline. So this is a nice overview of the kinds of areas that I want to consider as I go forward. So the first area, now this is actually out here would be the ocean, right? And as it approaches the land, we start to get some wave crowding where they come closer to each other. We'll talk about that again in a second. And then we have the wave height increasing, and then we have the area where it is breaking. So this is really the three major areas that I will be modeling in the ocean boards. And so it's nice to kind of have this delineation of where each of these kinds of begins and ends. So this gives us yet one more piece of information, in that one of the things I've been very, very curious about is how to model the water level as it goes all the way to the shore. So we have this line here, which is not necessarily designed to mark the water level, but you can see that as the waves develop and move across towards the shore, the actual water line stays almost the same all the way up into the swash. And this is after the surf has broken and the water rolls up onto the beach and then rolls back. Where it rolls up, this is what they call the swash. So that was a huge piece for me to figure out at this point, and kind of realize, as that's the fundamental aspect of how I'm going to be pouring the resin before I start building any of the waves on top of it. And finally, I wanted to understand a little bit more about the wave spacing. And this is a terrible diagram, but it was the, it got the job done, let's just say. And the most important thing to figure out here really is that if you look at the waves and their wavelength, all right, this is from trough to trough, or you can measure the wavelength from peak to peak. As the waves approach the shore, the wavelength decreases. I think I had a better diagram actually, but we'll stick with this. So the wavelength decreases and their heights increase. So you're going to end up having the water rising up. Now this actually doesn't show that very well, but what you end up with is the wave coming up and then the wavelength shortening. So the waves crowd as they rise up to the shore. Now it's not like they pile on top of each other, right? But it's kind of important to know that they get a little bit closer together, and that will be useful when I start using my casts for the ocean surface in terms of the wavelength that the casts have, and using that to judge how wide I should be putting apart the breaking waves when I add them to the boards. So that's the basic gist of the physics behind the waves, right? Shallow slopes produce spilling waves, steeper slopes plunging, very steep, surging. The water surface stays relatively even all the way across, even though here, I guess you can see, right, this is coming up as the wave height increases. So the wave height increases as it gets to the shore, and the wave length of the waves decreases. So with that in mind, oh, I lost my cursor. I thought I'd start with the waves that I will not be doing, which are plunging waves. And when I show you the boards, you might be able to argue that the steepness of the underlying beach and land underneath it is maybe steep enough to form a plunging wave, but I'm not so confident about that. And to be honest, modeling this type of wave, now of course this is a really big one, but this is really, I think, the most challenging task you can undertake for wave modeling. And I've seen a really good version of this. Now this is created by a Japanese miniatures dioramist master, and I cannot remember his name because it's really long and it's Japanese, but so I hope he doesn't take any offense if he ever sees my video. But this has got to be the most impressive plunging wave I've ever seen modeled. Now, I don't know the exact scale of this wave, but I believe this figure is at least an inch. We can judge, from the people in the back here, probably at least 2 inches tall. But just look at the froth and the arc, and this really gave me some ideas of what I could do if I wanted to model this. And then I realized I don't need to, probably shouldn't, and I sighed a big sigh of relief, because trying to compete with this, just to even approach it, is mind-boggling. And people always say, I'll never be able to do that. This is the kind of piece where I say, I'll never be able to do that. Like, it just makes me want to cry, but it inspires me to try harder as well. So we're going to take a look first here, well, second I should say, but really take a look at spilling waves, as this is the kind of wave I'm most likely going to be working with for the major areas of the shoreline. And this is not a great picture, but one of the things that I kind of liked about it was at least giving you a sense of their, the variety in terms of their spacing that you can have. You can even see a little bit, maybe a slight curl here, and that can happen with spilling waves. Depending on the slope, you can start to get a little plunging-like action, right? These are not like lines in the sand, so to speak. Get it? Lines in the sand. So you can get a little cross between them. But anyway, this kind of was like a quick, oh, okay, let's take a look at spilling waves. And this starts to get into much more the way I envision certain sections of the board looking, and that will be discussed later in this video and probably in future videos as the project progresses. But what you can see here, right, is we have these long spilling waves coming through, coming across this area with these steep rocks, breaking apart, coming through. And the one thing that I started to notice once I started looking at spilling waves is the amount of froth in the water. This is a very, very white, frothy, bubbly water for the ocean, rather than having a thin line of white water right behind the wave, for instance. And of course, this very tumultuous face, and right here, look at that. So you can just see just a little curl. So it kind of starts to go into a plunge, and then it collapses and spills over itself. Hence the name spilling waves. Again, this is a terrible picture, but it made an important point to me. So here we have spilling waves rolling up onto the shore. These are really quite small, but one of the things that it made me have some relief is that the distance between the water and the green, look at how short that is. Now, we don't have great objects in here for scale. We can assume these are trees. And so my boards tend to have had, and will still have, this very short transition between the water, the wet sand. This would be where the swash is, and then we have the wet sand lines, and then we have the dry sand lines. So this made me feel like it's okay to have a short transition between the two areas. Now that's a nice shot, isn't it? To be a photographer and capture these things. So this actually then started to make me think about around the island and how I might model the beaches for the island. And in fact, thinking about I'm not going to have a waterfall. Just going to let you know right now, not happening. But the types of rocks that are adjacent to this area, this has still got a fairly I don't want to say it's granitic. Maybe, it's got a very angular structure, faceted rock face, rather than some of the other ones that we're going to see in a moment that are worn down and quite smooth. But in fact, you can see here how much smoother this has been. And this is probably a different type of rock through, metamorphosis or tectonic uplift that's put these two together. But in any case, I really liked that. I really liked getting another look at another spill wave, and here you can see, right, it is pretty clean behind it. So again, we're not talking about, at least for me, I didn't think these aren't hard and fast rules. It's going to depend on where you're, interested in taking it. But the nicest thing about this picture for me is seeing as the swash, whatever, the water that's coming up and then receding, right? We get this sort of very distinct line that is separating that from, say, the wet sand areas, and then we have a line from that separating it from the dry sand. So this is something I really need to incorporate, are these bandings in my beaches to really capture some of that feel and have some of that wet water that's receding back, be a little bit more distinctive than what I've had in the past. And then, of course, looking at this water in the front of the wave, right, this is already churned up as it's pulling back, and it's really got a lot of froth in it, so that's something I need to think about a lot more as well. And here's another shot of the kinds of modeling that I want to do. So we have these large spill waves coming into shore, but also these very prominent rocky outcroppings. And when I explain the island boards more at the end of this video, this is really the look I want to capture. I want to have these rocks carried throughout the water. I want to have some along the shore. I will take this into some of the normal beach areas, and it's so dramatic. Look at how nice that is. Isn't that nice? And it gives yet one more look at this transition zone here, where you get this very glossy, sort of ankle deep, inch deep water, pulling up, pushing down. Pushing in, pulling out, maybe. Anyway, and then you have your wet sand area, and then of course your dry sand transition. And the scale is a little hard to tell, but these are, I think these are people here. So this is, not a tremendous area separating, the wet sand area to the shoreline. And so again, it makes me realize I don't have to have these long beaches carrying out to make it a plausible environment. Now, I thought I would try and play for you a wave video. Now, I looked at a couple videos, and this one I've tried to crop down a little bit, but I didn't crop it enough, so we're probably going to bounce through it a little bit. But what I wanted to see was some actual spill waves. Now, these are not spill waves, actually. These are surge waves. We're going to talk about those in a minute. However, they are adjacent to some spill waves. All right, so here we have the waves actually spilling, and you see that little curve, but you can see then once they break, they're really rolling through. And here comes the next one coming in, and you can see it rising up, getting ready to break, but not quite having enough of a lift, and then it just sort of crumbles down over itself without getting that true arc. And there's another great shot of that. So what's really nice about this is seeing these types of waves so close to the rocks that we saw before. And of course here you can see some of the rocks out there. And then with this pullback, right, there's a nice way to get a sense of, this guy's got not a very steady hand, but you get a look, and this is a nice aerial view, right, where you can see that froth zone as these spill waves come into this little islet, beach, harbor bay, whatever, this little cutout that's a beach. But yet here, notice right here, this is never really forming that ridge. This is a surge wave striking the rocks without ever breaking, because it's so fast of a drop that there's no time for it to fall over and create a spill swash. So it really just hits the rock and bangs up right against it, and you can see that here as well. So let's see here. We're going to zip ahead because I'm probably going to go way too long as it is. Oh, I'm probably going to miss a little spot that I really wanted, but that's all right. Well, in any case, and this guy, he's got these, I cropped this down, if you can believe it, quite a bit, but I wanted the pullback here that he gives, and then you can get that sense. Look at all the rocks in the water. That was so nice looking. Now, I'm not going to have that many along the beaches, but it's really great to see that, and also to get a sense of an aerial view. What's the water look like around it? A lot of froth, a lot of white water. And here is a quick clip, just a sort of close-up of thinking about what do these rocks maybe sort of look like up close, and the water is striking them. Now this is, look at this. This is kind of unusual. This is from Oregon, I believe. What an interesting form of rocks along the beach here. But once they're coming over, especially where it's shallow, they're just pouring over into this frothy mess with no more real shape to the wave. So that's something, if I have a lot of rocks close together, I'll have to take into consideration, and that's an interesting break there. It's still possible with spill waves to end up with a large splash that has a lot of energy in it. So if that's something I want to incorporate, I can really still bring that into play. So that's that. Now we'll take a look at surging waves. This is the third type of wave, and this wave is when the water is coming up and there's such a steep transition it doesn't have time to form a big peak and to fall over into some kind of a froth or spill or plunge. So this is really key, because this is what you're going to have if you have any rocks deep in the water, and this is going to play a critical role in modeling the island in the middle of the ocean, because it's not going to have much of a beach, so there's not much of a transition between the water and the rock faces themselves. So here, another quick shot showing you, the amount of white water. There's quite a bit, and I really didn't understand that in the last couple versions of oceans that I've done. And the other thing to consider also, though, is the intensity of the ocean surface itself. This is relatively calm, and I think I've modeled my molded sections to be quite a bit steeper. Now, if you don't know what I mean by my rock casting molded sections, once I add this video to the regular video, I'll put a link to it up here, and you can see the original casting that I did to give me a texture across the surface of the water. But another chance to take a look at some types of rocks, right, and the varieties that can be present. Another instance here of seeing a surge wave really coming up and hitting with a lot of force, so that's still an option. If if I want a lot of energy in a spot, I can add that. And oh, this is what I want to model. Look at that. How beautiful is that? And so this is the kind of landforms I want to have around the island. And again, this is really producing a surge surf in this area. And in fact, really, it's creating a surge all the way up into the shoreline, right? We don't see spill waves rolling in. Now, part of that is because these rocks are probably breaking up a lot of the energy, which means that the waves are just kind of coming in, and based on their size and the rate of climb of the ground, by the time they start to feel the bottom, because they're so low in amplitude, they're already right here, and then they're breaking. So it's more like a surge along the shore as well. But in any case, you can see out where the waves are stronger, and this is probably a little closer to the wave heights I have going on my ocean open areas. So that's kind of interesting, and it can still produce quite a bit of energy when it strikes the rocks. But I really wanted to start looking at these kinds of land formations as well, thinking about the island project, the island portion of the project. And here, this is merely a, this is sort of a low surge surf, right? Not a lot of energy, but what I picked up on is this rock formation. This is really quite angular, and oftentimes I always think of rocks in the ocean as being very worn smooth, and I'm not sure what causes this formation. I do believe it's natural. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it looks natural because it doesn't appear that it has been put in place for erosion control. I could be wrong. But in any case, that's one of the things that caught my eye, that maybe it's possible to have this kind of angular rock right up against the water. And this is another video clip montage, if you will, showing the, if it'll play smoothly, okay, there we go, showing surge surf actually in motion. And what you can see, right, is that it's really right up into here. It's not, I don't know why it's playing so badly. I guess my computer's a little overloaded, but look at that. It's really hardly even breaking, and then giving that big strike there. So this is really the kind of, oh my goodness, well, I am not reshooting this, so let's let that maybe catch up. Oh no. Ah! This is a flashback. Remember all these? Remember? Do you remember all these? Okay. And let's come forward a little bit on this. Let's see here. This is actually a short segment. But in any case, I don't know why this section is playing so poorly. Maybe it was the way I rendered it. Oh no, come here. Oh my god. Oh, you know what? Alright, we'll finish it right here in PowerPoint. Maybe it'll play better. It doesn't like me trying to zip ahead for some reason. Alright. Well, sorry for the technical glitches here. It's a lot to manage. I had to put this whole PowerPoint slide together, render these sub-segments of these videos to stick them in so I could actually zip through these, and then add this all to the final video and re-render that. So there's a lot going on here, but I think I'm doing pretty well considering all of that. Anyway, here we go. Ooh, see, these waves, a lot like the waves I have in my casts, so it's nice to get a sense of that. And then here we have those waves striking a cliff face directly against the water, and so this is again what we call a surge wave, because it never has time to break before it starts to release its energy on the surface of the object. So this is the kind of information I was looking for when I was doing my research, and it's given me an understanding of the types of waves, the kinds of surfaces, and how those affect the waves when they hit them, and also gives me some idea about the kinds of rocky shores that I can work with to create this kind of a surf and a lot of interest to the shoreline. So with our slightly janky Wave 101 basics out of the way, we'll pull back and actually start taking a look at some of the boards. So here I am trying to work towards one takes, and of course you can't have it be one take if the camera isn't recording. So now that I'm recording, I'll do the one take for you and the two take for me. This is one of the island boards. All right, there are 4 of them. Each one is a corner piece, and you'll see here this line. This is what I've designated as my no man's land, meaning that I do not want to consider anything breaching this line, because this is going to be a cliff face. Of course, we're looking at it top down, so we have to use our imagination of the mind. All right, it's going to come out as a big cliff, and this area I need to preserve, because at the top of this cliff, which will be 10 inches tall, maybe ballpark, maybe a little more, I want space for a building. So what I did is struck that line and then said, that's what I have to work with. I needed a beach. There's going to be 2 beaches in the corners, 2 beaches on these island corner boards. And I wanted to think about what's the minimum size I can make the beach. Well, it's really the maximum size, but it ends up being what's the minimum that looks realistic in the real world, because I have trouble, right, making a really big beach and having appropriately slopes that are out here and surf and that sort of idea. So this is 6 inches long, and I'm going to raise this end up an inch, so I'll have a 1 to 6 inch slope. And the idea being, as I was talking about in the wave section we just saw, that then I can have surf spilling onto this, have a very low spill area, come up and be a little, you know, the sort of wash area, and then some wet sand. And so people could land here and then sort of, you know, trudge through it ankle deep water to get to this point. And there will be a path that leads to the top of the cliff coming up, which I have not really given a lot of thought about at this point, because just getting to this stage was most of the week's planning time plus my wave education. So what do you see here around this area? These are going to be rock outcroppings that will be part of the you know, the impression that we have where areas coming off of the large cliff. And you saw several of these pictures and videos where there were these pillars of rocks coming out of the water. I loved that. I fell in love with them right away, and that was something I wanted to add to this. So what you see are the general shapes of the casts I'm planning. This is not fixed in stone, but I just wanted something to guide me mentally. And then these will be the peaks where you see, you know, this will be the top of it, and the size will, you know, progressively go down. Roughly, you know, here this one would be, you know, much taller than, say, this one, and maybe taller than this one. I haven't organized those heights yet, except that these two, you know, these sort of ones against the back wall will obviously be quite a bit taller. Now, thinking about surf, as I was just showing you, really I'm looking at 2 types of surf in this environment. I'm going to have this spill surf coming up here where it'll start to break and wash off down to here, and I'll have to check those measurements again, and actually we'll talk about it in the next board more. And then here I will have surging surf lapping against these areas, and by keeping this transition very close to the face of the cliff, this will allow me to have some of that surging surf come up right against it. And it's going to, I think, really create a very nice contrast to the beach, and at the same time make a very realistic sort of environment, because, you know, without this shallow slope, you're not going to get that spill type of wave. So that gives you a little insight into what I'm thinking about the corner boards. There are going to be 4 of these, of course, and the important thing is that I want these joins to be perfectly seamless in terms of the cuts in the rock face as they come down this line, right from 10 inches down to the water. I have an idea on how to do that. I'm not going to share that with you today, but I will say it is using Bragdon rock molds. And if you are new to the channel and you did not see the Bragdon rock molds, I will put a link to the video where I talk about the rock molds here. And I will add as a small addendum that I have tried to contact Mr. Bragdon to see if I could get him to show me some photos of a handful of molds that he has on the site that do not have pictures. I bought 2 molds more just for this project, and I might like to I might like to buy an additional mold or 2 to help me create some variety in this cliff face, because it is a wide expanse of stone. It's going to look very strong, and trying to make sure it doesn't look tiled is going to be part of that. And the mold that I'm currently using, I can't necessarily flip sideways or flip upside down, so that's going to add a little bit of a challenge, but more molds might help. So we'll see what Mr. Bragdon says. I sent him to a couple links of what I've done with his molds. I warned him I wasn't necessarily enthusiastic about his site, but his molds are awesome. So make sure you check out that link I had just up there in the corner. That's the corner board. Took me a long time to figure out all of this, especially with regards to the surf and the rocks and how that's going to work in the beach. But now that that's done, the work can start really moving forward a lot more seamlessly. So in this board, this is going to be one of the straight boards. This is going to be a normal shore edge board. And this was where I really started to think about what's wrong with my waves and how do I need to fix it. If you recall, this was one of my early templates. Now, actually, this is great because this is really one of the originals. And you'll see here that I have this straight edge, and then I have a relatively sharp break where I was making the shore here and then the deep water out there. Now, 2 things happened with this that made me really change it a lot. First is because these boards are matching some other boards I've made for the customer, I had to cut them down. So when I cut them down, all right, it dropped the line here, and I had even less of a transition coming up to the top flat area. And I realized that this, even on this board, right, I'm only getting a transition from here to here to put in all the aspects of the waves that I need. I need the area where it starts to swell. I need the area where it starts to rise in amplitude. It starts to curve, break, form the spill water, and then have the spill water break over and then turn into the wash and then the wet sand and the dry sand. There is no room on this to do that. So what I decided to do was take these, and I actually ended up grinding these down to make a smoother transition. I'll have to check all of these lines one more time before I start to finish them. And then I had to go back through and think about all of those aspects of the waves and where they're going to sit on this board as the water progresses coming up. Let me get my pointer here. So first thing I started to map out is where is going to be the back edge of the dry sand. Then I'm going to have the edge of the wet sand. This is wet. This will be the front edge of the dry. Then here's where my wash will be. Here's where the front of the spill will fall off. Here's the front of the basically where's the large spill happening. Where's the start of the waves spilling, and the swells where the water starts to rise, and it rises in amplitude right in the wavelength, decreases per the Education 101 that I just showed you. So what you can see is that I need to map that to the actual contour of the underwater landform. So I can't start to have the water rise, for the swell before it starts to actually rise underneath. And that meant that I had to extend this slope. And what that does also is it works better, I should say, because this is really the way the slope of a beach is going to work. Now, of course, you're going to end up with variations depending on your beach, right? Where you have something extremely shallow, and that would be a very long spill type waveform. You'd have something that's very, very steep, where you're going to get something where you get that plunging wave. And of course, there's some things in the middle, but I decided that based on the scale and the dimensions of this, transition, that a spill wave is going to work way better than a plunge wave. And I never thought about that until I started doing this research. So that's the waves that you can expect to see. And once I had that all mapped out, the last thing I had to figure out is how am I going to pour the resin, how deep, and how does that resin level fit in with all of these other effects. And as we learned in the Waves 101 section, is that the water level actually remains relatively unified at the bottom of the waves. And that means that I can pour the cast, well, I can pour the water. Oh, wait a minute. This is not the official one. That's why I was like, where's that information? Here we go. So I can make the fourth pour of my resin come all the way out to here, because that's where the wash is, and that's where the flat area of the water should be. All of these parts of the waves are what rise above it because of the rise of the land underneath. So that's a huge, huge help in both terms of the way, the actual mechanics of modeling it. How do I pour the water? How do I build the waves? But it's also going to make it so much more realistic, and it helps preserve the overall depth of the water more so than I originally expected. There will be rocks in the water, of course, some areas along the shore, and of course some vegetation under it. I've got some new ideas on how to improve that as well. And so that is really going to change this a lot. And rocks that are out deeper, right, I can get the surge swells on them, and I think I can model those better. So tons of improvements, tons of knowledge. And while you look at this and you may think that that's all you got done this week is just sanding these down, I spent hours and hours of my own time doing this education so that I know I can get this right. It's going to save me time in the end. The end product's going to look better, and it's information I can carry forward with me onto future projects. So it's worth the investment up front, but Lord, can I just tell you, I'm not a religious man. I don't know why I use that as an emphasis, but just to make this map here took me a lot of time. Actually, oh yeah, took me a lot of time. And then also having to grind these all down and sand this out and make sure it's all uniform. No small feat either. But all of that pre-work is done now, and I'm ready to start actually surfacing these boards and getting them moving forward. So pretty exciting stuff. So having that overview, the waves, the boards, I think that gives you a sense of where I want to try to take these boards. And I think combining all of that knowledge, I feel much better about getting a more realistic wave look on these boards. So I'm pretty excited, actually. And I think knowing the proper wave for this environment is going to make it look more realistic, and is going to save me some time, actually. Well, I always say that. It never does. But it's going to keep it from blowing up more in terms of time. So in some ways, it saves me a little. So hopefully you will come back. I am a couple days late on my weekly update. It seems like I'm drifting a little bit as I go along because I really wanted to get all of this research squared away. So instead of shooting this on Thursday, I'm now shooting it on Saturday, which means next time I try to aim for Thursday, I'm probably going to shoot it on Sunday. So, I'm going to work on being as close to weekly as I can. It'll probably be an 8-day schedule. I don't know. Anyway. Thank you for joining me once again. I hope you enjoyed this unusual look at ocean terrain, and hopefully you'll come back and see the progress of this set and how I incorporate that knowledge. Questions and comments, always welcome down below. And I almost forgot. I've been getting a lot of questions over time about water effects, Envirotex, what are the materials that I use. So I want to remind you once again that there is an article on my Patreon page that talks about all the materials that I know of, mostly for creating water effects. I give you a little bullet point about them, some thoughts about how to use them. And then last month I had a patron who wanted me to do a much more in-depth article on Envirotex. So what I did is I wrote an article on Envirotex. You might consider it a chapter in a book. It's long, but what I did is I gave you sort of chapter headings throughout the article, whether it's application or the curing process or maybe fixing mistakes or, So I created a little table of contents at the top, then all the information down below. And if you have any questions about Envirotex, I can't believe this won't answer some of those questions. It's about as detailed as I could make it, short of actually mixing it right in front of you. So hopefully you find that interesting, and I encourage you to go take a look at it because I do get so many questions on it. And I will say keeping up with email and comments is starting to get tougher for me. That doesn't mean don't leave one down below, but it does mean I'm trying to be more aware of it and think about what I can manage. So there may be some modifications in the future, but trying to give you these resources is part of that, and making sure that I can answer more questions all at once without doing them individually. So take a look at it, because I get a lot of questions on it. And it took me a long time to write it. So it would make me feel better if somebody looked at it and thought, ooh, that's pretty nice. I won't tell you how long it took me to write it. Anyway, I keep saying that, but I'm not done. But I am done now. Thank you once again for joining me. As you know, I always appreciate it. And stay tuned to the TerranScapes channel, because you know I'll be back soon with another TerranScapes video. So here I am thinking that I'm doing one takes now, and I just did an entire take. But you know what? You can't do a one take if the camera isn't turned on. So let's go through it again, for me again. This is a picture of the corner boards. Wait a minute. Check, am I recording? Okay. 3, fuck me. 2, 1.